Okay, so when I left you at the end of my presentation in the first session, I was talking about retractions, and I think that whilst those retractions were being taken seriously by bodies in China, there was a tipping point. And that tipping point came when the Washington Post reported on the 43 retractions from Biomed Central. I'm reliably informed that this came from the very top of the Chinese government, and as a result, obviously, that kind of made things happen in China, because that's what happens. So as a result of this, Biomed Central anyway were very, very involved with bodies in China around what had happened in this instance. They'd done an awful lot of research into what had happened. They'd had an open dialogue with COPE throughout the entire process of this before they'd even approached the Chinese institutions. And what they'd found was that all or the majority of the papers that were involved in this swathe of retractions had all gone through the same author services company. So what happened then was that the body that was investigating this, the Chinese Academy of Science and Technology, which oversees pretty much all research that is carried out in China, they launched this investigation, and when it came to light that this particular author services company had been involved, then they kind of felt that they'd found where the problem was, and it was very easy for them at that point to be able to say, right, it's their fault. So what happened as a result of that was that because this particular author services third party was supposedly to blame, it meant that the stance from CAST was very much that the authors were, I guess, kind of ignorant of the processes of what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. So they decided to release these guidelines, which they're trying to they're trying to put through, as I say, all of the research that they cover, which is pretty much everything in China. Essentially saying that manuscripts cannot be written by third parties. All of these are very much kind of common sense to the Western world, I think. But what they were really trying to do was put over the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, maybe the infrastructure isn't there in China to be able to support the research that is going on at the moment, sustain the growth that they're seeing. So these were very much kind of guidelines to be able to kind of give people the basics as to what it is that they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. So your manuscripts cannot be written by somebody else. If you're an author, you've got to be involved in it. They cannot be submitted by third parties. Again, something that we touched on earlier on was the fact that some of these unethical companies were essentially taking over the entire submission process and providing all of the fake peer review information, all that kind of thing. So again, authors should not be doing that. Third parties should not modify the scientific content of the manuscript. Now, this particular area has caused a little bit of an issue for companies in the area in which I work, partly due to bad reporting in China. You can see that I've got the URL just here, which is the CAST website, so it's a reliable place to look. And they actually have all of these guidelines written out in full in Chinese. They have not provided an English language version of it yet, but Google Translate and Chinese colleagues and things like that have helped us to be able to put this together. And the issue with this particular point, which has caused something of a headache, has been the poor reporting. Essentially, if you look on this web page, it's a big old web page. There's a lot of text on it. People reporting on these things don't necessarily want to put all that text in. So this particular line just got changed to third parties should not edit the manuscript, which takes language editing out of the equation. Now, the reason that I'm referring back to this URL is because this URL actually specifically mentions language editing, language polishing, and says, this is allowed. You really can do this, just don't modify the scientific content. So, like I say, this one has caused quite a few problems, shall we say. The whole kind of process of putting out these guidelines, there's not been an awful lot of transparency gone on with what CAST have done. They haven't particularly consulted with any Western publishers. They haven't consulted with COPE. Essentially, they've put these out, which is kind of fine because we need to have these guidelines out there for researchers to be able to follow. It would have been nice if there'd been a little bit of cooperation, but we're still kind of working on that. Just to finish off the 5 don'ts, authors shouldn't provide false peer reviewer information. I think we've already gathered the fact that people have done that in the past, but the scale at which we're seeing it at the moment is pretty much down to these third parties who are instigating all of this. And then we get onto the part about authoring. And if you're on the author list, you actually have to have contributed to the manuscript, to the research, and if not, then you don't have any place on there. So that's the response from the government, and they're very much passing this to all of the various research institutions. Like I say, CAST oversees pretty much all research in China and the various bodies that are involved in that, and they're putting out letters to each of the different institutes around China to be able to make their researchers aware of these. So the good thing of this is that it is going to hopefully get rid of the supposed ignorance that CAST had blamed all of those previous retractions on. We'll have to see how that works out and if there is going to be any further cooperation with the industry as a whole, which obviously would be a good thing. So for the industry response, author services companies, particularly in China, had been taking quite a bit of a kicking over the course of the past 2 or 3 years, with a lot of the reports of these retractions from Chinese authors who had been using unethical author services companies. So a group of 6 ethical author services companies came together to form the Alliance for Scientific Editing in China. This essentially is still very much in its infancy. We're only now looking at drafting guidelines that members ought to be following. Obviously, we haven't kind of opened things up to general membership or anything just yet, but that will all be coming over the course of the rest of this year. Each of the companies involved are essentially taking it upon themselves to be able to bring the quality and the standards of author services companies within China as a whole up to that of an acceptable level for the industry. Don's editage, obviously a very well-established company in China, Enago as well. And along with the Dans, we kind of see ourselves as the big brothers of these. All 3 of those companies have an international presence. The others that are involved there, Ivy Editing, Letpub, Majadan, maybe have less of a Western presence. But the 6 of us are working together to be able to bring this alliance to fruition. Obviously, what we will need from this is going to be some help from the industry as a whole to be able to bring this to the awareness of researchers, We are essentially going to be looking at using this as a stamp of quality. We're going to be opening it up to other author services companies within China to be able to join, and essentially we will be monitoring them to make sure that everybody is abiding by the guidelines, of which, as I say, this is just the first draft. We had a conference call a couple of weeks ago to go through these. Hopefully we're going to be able to finalise them. I'm not going to go through every single one. Again, it's things that are very much kind of common sense, but the main thing to remember here is that part of the reason that we're kind of in this mess could be put down to ignorance on the part of researchers, maybe even ignorance on the parts of some of the service providers. And what we're hoping that we'll be able to do is to be able to, like I say, bring that industry of author services in China up to a level which is going to be acceptable for international publication. Thank you.